Hi, I'm Kaylee Evans. Welcome to my channel, Social Care Connections. I hope you enjoy the video. Cultural competence is about our will and actions to build understanding between people, to be respectful and open to different cultural perspectives, strengthen cultural security, and work towards equality in opportunity. I've asked you to come today to have a chat with me because I wanted to talk about cultural competence. And I feel like that's really relevant with everything that's happening at the moment in the media and around things in America. And I think it's really troubling, a lot of the things that's going on. So I think we'd start by talking about the education system as a whole. So I was watching a TED talk today, and it was saying it was a story of how this girl had been, when she was at school, she said that she felt there was a lot of pressure on her to really educate other people on Black culture. And she felt that that was a lot of pressure, considering she was only young at the time. And she was just saying that she felt like there should be more in the actual syllabus about it, and the teachers should be more knowledgeable rather than putting it on just one person in a room. And I kind of understand that. I think that is a lot of pressure, and I thought that I wonder if you could relate to that in any way through how it was for you at school or how it was at uni as well.
Yeah, I mean, my experience in school was I didn't like it at all. So until about year 9, I was the only Black people in my school. So I had to deal with a lot of what I at the time would have described as bullying, but actually it was just racism. So I would have, my peers pulling up my grades, for example, as I'm walking past. But it was never actually dealt with as racism.
Oh,
and yeah, and for me that kind of led me to believe that, in terms of schools, they still have a long way to go in terms of tackling racism and the way it impacts students. So at that time, and even just sometimes the way my teachers treated me, I just felt that it wasn't right. But I think when you're a child, you don't always have the language to kind of express what you're feeling or what you're experiencing. So it's only now that I'm older, I'm like, I can kind of connect the dots. But also just looking back, even in history, I remember, we had to watch Roots. And for me, it was the most, I don't know if you've seen it, but it was the film about slavery in history.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, everyone turned around, they were all looking at me. It was quite insensitive in the sense that, my teacher did put it on and they're like, oh, are you going to be okay? As opposed to kind of acknowledging the history of slavery and the impact it has on our communities, and kind of introducing it to everyone in the class than just like me in a way. But I've had a lot of that I can't even think of now, just instances where I thought, it could have been done better. But also I feel the education system, here is very much whitewashed, in the sense that we learn a lot about like Martin Luther King. We learn a lot about, Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, but then we don't really talk about Black British history. I mean, it's only in 2015 that the government stopped paying slave owners for the loss of their slaves. That's only in 2015. This is like Britain that we're talking about. But all these things in terms of the slavery, our, Britain's involvement, they don't talk about it quite a lot in history class, in education. And then you expect society to understand the microaggressions, the racism today, and why the things are the way they are.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to understand the history of it to understand what we can do to move it forward. And I did actually, I've put a lot of thought into this lately, and I do think that the way history is taught could be more relatable anyway. And I think it's talking to people like yourself and making it real is really important. And then talking about real stories. And then, I mean, I have read the Martin Luther King Strength to Love book, and it really moved me, because I think I tried to put myself in the place of imagining being him in that massive fight and fighting for oppression. And I remember there was a key bit in it that just really got to me, because it was when his house had been set on fire and he felt like everyone was against him. And he didn't want to go on because he was scared for his family, but then he did, and he went forward with it. And it just shows like the burden that can be on a group of people when they're on their own. And I think that's why I think, you know, coming together like this and having a chat and just feeling like you're not on your own. And I think one of the things that I thought from the Social Matters podcast when they mentioned it was around if you're on your own and you're the only Black person saying something, and then you feel like you haven't got other people, you can seem like the angry Black person on your own. And I think it reminded me, you know what I mean? And it's like my friend Miles, he's in another video where we're talking about disability, and he said that sometimes he just seems like the angry disabled person. And I think it's like, that's so unhelpful, isn't it, that you can feel so isolated. And I think as a whole, social work and education and things like that, we're meant to be collectively looking at these issues. And it's also made me think about the fact that social work is a global profession, isn't it?
Oh, of course,
So things like what's going on in America, it should be something that we're talking about, and the political side of it, because it affects everything. People internalize things that are happening, and it should feel like people are interested. I know that I've seen quite a lot on Twitter about people feeling like, why aren't we talking about this more, which made me think.
Yeah, I mean, before that, I was just going to add on what you were saying about Martin Luther King, and it kind of reminds me of conversations or discussions around race in this country. So normally, in my opinion, my personal opinion is that racism or race is not up for debate at all. But then you will go on a panel on Good Morning Britain, for example, and there's only one person, you know, a Black person or a person of color, and they have to argue with Piers Morgan and, you know, other panelists about racism and the fact that it does exist. And sometimes it makes you question yourself as a person who's experienced racism. Actually, is it real? Is it just me? Because we see it all the time. You know, I mean, how many debates have we seen recently or discussions, for example, even about Meghan Markle and all of this, and is Britain racist? And this is not a question that we should even be asking.
Yeah.
You know, when we know the fact, you know, in terms of the history of the empire and so forth, it's not up for debate, but it's also not healthy to be constantly arguing and debating as if your experience is not legitimate. But also, as you were saying about social workers, and for us, I think, you know, we are in a privileged position, but also we play an important role when it comes to these things, because we are the people that go out in these communities. We are the people that will work with children of different backgrounds, you know, with many very different issues. It could be domestic abuse, but also immigration. It could be around disability as well. And even then with disability, we know that in most Black and ethnic minority communities, it's something that's kind of a taboo. It's not always spoken about properly, and people do not always understand, you know, when their child is disabled, what does that mean?
Collecting and having these conversations with different people, it's like no one can be left out of the conversation. It needs to be everyone. I think maybe we should talk about professional curiosity. I think one of the things that I was feeling is possibly people find it a difficult topic to talk about, race, and sometimes that can cause barriers which could actually impact on our practice, because social workers, part of our role is to ask the difficult questions. And maybe that's something that, a key reason why it should be more on the agenda in education for us as social workers. So maybe we have the language to ask the right questions and to know how to ask them. And I just thought, what do you think about that?
And I think it's really important. And I think, as I was saying before, we're in a position that, you know, we play a very key role in terms of our practice. So I do think in terms of professional curiosity, this is not something you are going to learn about it in practice, but I feel as though it's a bit too late. Because I think we should be prepared by having, you know, professionals maybe that work on racial equality. For example, when I did the lecture at my former university, I did it alongside my friend, but also who works in higher education, and this is her specialty. And it was quite interesting that a lot of people actually had, started asking questions, and I was like, wow, I never thought about things like that. And I think, for me, being uncomfortable is not a good enough excuse, because we have seen what happens when professionals are uncomfortable when it comes to race, in terms of, sexual grooming, child sexual exploitation and so forth, where then actually are we, because we're uncomfortable, are we then, not that we're allowing children to experience harm, but that kind of lack of curiosity and, being uncomfortable can lead to, harm of children. So I do think as professionals we need to be more curious, that we need like a lot of training. And for me, there's never a stupid question or a silly question. It's about asking, it's about doing research, it's about us becoming more and more comfortable. Because even myself as a Black person, I work in a predominantly Asian community, so obviously I'm quite far removed from their experiences. And even though I can understand, and it's about us, bringing up these conversations, or actually someone does ask a question, be comfortable enough to answer it. And, if you don't know, just say, I will do my research. And I do think it's missing in education, because I think we spoke about earlier on, how sometimes, the subject of race or things like FGM are an afterthought in university. It's not a key, topic in terms of the overall module. But one of the examples that I can think of is, in practice, there's sometimes where I speak to the families that I work with, and they're so scared to say the word Black. So I remember one time I'd gone out to see one of my families, and the child had been seen by a mental health professional, and I was like, oh, what's their name? And the mom had forgot. And then she was like, oh, she's like, she looks like you. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, oh, she's colored. And I was like, oh, you mean she's Black? And I was like, it's okay, you can say the word Black, it's not offensive.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I didn't know. I thought it was, offensive. And that alone, it just shows that, we have a role to also educate our families, but also ourselves as professionals. And I feel as though actually we're not doing enough. People are doing the hard work, but I just think on a global scale, we're not doing enough in terms of being culturally competent, but also just, in terms of fighting the racial injustices, it's just not enough. For example, when we look at domestic violence, a lot of our cases sometimes it's women with no recourse to public funds, and that's mainly, people of, different ethnic backgrounds. And why is that? And how do we then support them in that kind of position?
And I think obviously you're coming from a children's perspective, and I work with adults.
I didn't realize.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, like, how do I think that this relates to an adult's perspective? And I think one of the things that you brought up that I was thinking about was people feeling engaged in the community. And I think also from having a friend that's from Africa, and he lived there for a long time, and he had a business there, and then he came to this country. He said one of the main things for him was the difference in the way that families care for each other. So he said that, like, you'd have big extended families in Africa, and like everyone cared for each other. You'd care for the children like communally more. And then he came here, and I think he said that one of the things was that he found different was that people don't invite each other around for dinner in the same way, and that made him feel isolated at times. And he said that he really appreciated when my family invited him round, and he found that was a nice thing. And it's just little things like that about recognizing what it takes for someone to feel valued and part of a community. And I think it's like it's not just about like the safeguarding and risk, but emotional well-being is central as well, isn't it? And it's like you've got to really really ask the questions about what it means to have a good life for someone from a different culture. And it's like just stepping into someone else's world, isn't it? And you do need to be comfortable enough to ask those things.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that. Actually, you just reminded me of something in terms of families. And I was speaking to my manager about it. Sometimes from a children's perspective, we go out there and we talk about, emotional warmth. And sometimes the way in the Western world, I believe, when we talk about emotional warmth, it's always on the kind of side of, are they affectionate in terms of cuddles and, you know, the comfort, soothing? But then when I look at it from a, you know, my perspective, even growing up in Zimbabwe, you know, the first 11 years of my life, sometimes emotional warmth is not the same as what we think it is in the Western world. It could be me sitting with my mom doing an activity, or with my mom, you know, doing my hair, and we're just there bonding and having a chat. And sometimes I think, you know, as social workers, then we miss a lot of the key kind of things that could be really important. And that I kind of question then if we're more knowledgeable, then would we have different outcomes for some of the families that we work with? Even things like family group conference that we speak about. I was even saying to my manager, sometimes we work with people that actually, because of their insecure immigration status, it means actually they don't have family around them. So they're isolated. How do we build up their network? Who do they consider family? That it's not strange to find a child that goes to church and they call someone auntie and uncle, even though they're not blood related. So how do we then bring that into practice in terms of how we support our families and our children, and how do we extend their network with having to look outside the norm of what a family is, the nuclear family, your grandma, your aunties, and so forth. Because even in my culture, there's no such thing as an extended like family. Everyone is just family, you know.
And to be honest, I thought it sounded pretty great. Like I was like, actually, I think maybe we've got something wrong over here. That's quite nice, the idea. And that's the thing, isn't it? Like by being interested, you can then consider a different way. And things that they've taught me, it's like I've actually implemented into my own life. But I think it's just sometimes we can be sucked into the same way of doing things and not take on.
Definitely. Because I think for me during this pandemic, what I've realized is, even though we've always kind of spoken to our neighbors, it's never been on a kind of deep level, getting to know them properly. Whereas now that everyone, unfortunately, you know, they have to stay at home, you've got no choice. So the only communication you're going to have is with your neighbors. But then it reminded me of the difference when I was growing up in Zimbabwe and how, you know, like the whole street would know who I am. So if I was in trouble, you know, down the road, they would not come and tell my mom or to look after me and so forth. I mean, obviously there can be dangers with that, don't get me wrong, but also that community kind of spirit, and just how it can be quite lovely and how it can make people feel secure. Whereas here, there's people that, you know, that I've lived here for half of my life and I don't even know their name. They don't know my name at all.
I think that's what's missing. Like, I think I think community social work needs to be more dominant. Like I've got this from speaking to the McIntyre charity, and they really support people well in terms of looking at people's individual potential and really pulling on the assets of like what's around. And I think sometimes if we're just so focused on this is the assessment, we're going to do this and we're going to put in this one thing and this will help them, or this is what this family needs to fit into, you know, from your perspective of children. We're missing so much like abundance that we might have like around us. And I think that's it as well. It's like we need to look at what people have as their individual strengths, don't we?
Definitely, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I think actually would have better outcomes even in children's social care and adult social care within our communities. Because, you know, the way I see it, I think people that I live here with, you know, for me, it wouldn't be outrageous or shocking if I went and gave them like food, because that's just normal. Whereas with other people, they might think, oh my God, what? Like, you know, I don't know if it's not shocking to me at all, because even when I go out to the shops, I'm like to my neighbors, if you want anything from the shop, I'll get it for you. And oh, don't worry. And it's like, no, actually, it's okay to accept help from your neighbor, because at the end of the day, we are a community. And I wonder if we were to kind of encourage more of this communal life and the spirit of, you know, their community, what, you know, the positive impact it would have, especially, I think, you know, on adults. Because I think I remember back in uni, we spoke a lot about how a lot of adults, the elderly, are lonely in the community because it's kind of like they're forgotten about. We know they exist, but they're not part of, you know, the community as much. And it kind of makes you feel sad, really.
Yeah, and I think we are living in a multicultural society, aren't we? So the best thing we can do is have conversations, because we're enriching everything.
If you enjoyed the video, please can you like and subscribe and press the bell if you'd like to be updated when I put out more videos. Thank you.